So it's sort of this idea of this terrifying creature that shows up, and I mean, what kid would want to be greeted by that
Absolutely. Yeah.
outside their door, right? It's like, you get the knock on the door and you're like, well, I wonder who it is. And the kids run to the door, and then suddenly you open the door and here's this terrifying beast on the other side of the door who, scoops you up and puts you in a sack or beats you within an inch of your life with birch birch rods. So
Sure, why not? I
yeah,
mean,
it's
I'm sure I've seen kids that are scared going to see Santa at the mall to get
yes,
their
yes,
photos
exactly.
taken. That
Yeah. Well,
I
and
could
that's
just imagine, the knock on the door, and there's Krampus standing there.
I know, with like a sack and a stick and this big, free outfit. And that's the one thing too. Like, I really love looking back, looking at the traditional costuming, because originally the people that did this, they would come down from the mountains right into the villages, and there would be not just one, there would be several, right? And sometimes they would accompany Saint Nicholas, and other times they would do it the night prior, and they would go door to door. So it's an interesting thing, but these masks were just pieces of art unto themselves because they're all hand carved
Oh yeah,
and
I've
hand
seen
painted.
photos. It's
They're phenomenal.
fantastic.
I know,
The
it's
the
just
work that goes
beautiful.
into those.
Yeah, and then the outfits themselves are all made from goat skins with that long Alp goat with the long hair, and it's just, I mean, the workmanship and the weight of the costume and putting on this mask and these, this big carp and then the horns, right? Which mine don't want to stay on my head, but they're going to be there. But so you've got this image, and then they've got the bells, and they're shaking the bells, and the bells are ringing, and they're cowbells, right? So they're loud, and they've got several of them wrapped around themselves with chains or ropes with these bells, and they're coming down from the mountains, and that would be pretty terrifying, I think,
Well,
to
it would be.
see a bunch of these.
I haven't seen the video that you were talking about.
Oh,
I
okay.
noticed that you did post it, but I
Yes, I
haven't
did.
watched it yet.
Oh, do watch it. It's
But
phenomenal.
with, as you say, with the costumes in the
Hmm.
parade and the fires,
Oh, yeah.
that's literally got to be terrifying, as opposed to the delightful little Santa Claus parades that we
Yeah.
have here with dancing elves
Yes, yes. And
and there they've got these hideous horned creatures, carrying these torches, marching
yes.
down the street.
Yeah, and shaking these loud bells and these chains and these ropes, and and these long tongues that, and the eyes, and I mean, they're just, it's something from a nightmare, and for children it definitely is something from a nightmare. But the story is so simplistic. I mean, it's not a difficult story to understand. And even at the time before Christianity came into it, and these creatures were coming down and going, home to home, the reason was to scare away the evil spirits, those, that may cross over at that time of year during the solstice, during, that Yule period. And so these creatures would come, and in a weird sort of way, much like we do for Halloween now with jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins and all of those things when we talked about the Halloween show. There's a tradition in this, right? And there's a reason for it. It's not just to dress up in a scary costume and terrify people. It really had a purpose, and it was rooted in a culture that, for the most part, pre-Christianity, were, a pantheon of gods. I mean, Woden was part of German beliefs, which, we know as Odin, but that story. And so, you had like Odin's, like the wild ride, and that's where Santa comes from, is Odin's wild hunt, his ride, where he, had his goats pulling his sleigh and, flying through the sky at night. And so we get this image of Santa, and people might want to argue it, but before the Coca-Cola Santa came along, yeah, I mean, we see a very different version of Santa Claus. If you look at European stories, it's Saint Nicholas, right, with the long robe and the more of the
Yeah,
mitre hat
yeah.
and the staff, and that kind of stemmed over into Victorian times in England, you start to see that Santa Claus. It looks a little bit like a combination of the Green Man and this Saint Nicholas thing, where you've got more of the big robes that you may have seen on a druid, or on the idea of the Green Man with these flowing green robes, and or even in Dickens' story, A Christmas Carol, where the ghost of Christmas Present is this
Hmm.
large jovial man with his big, sort of pagan robes and his
Right.
crown, and that. So we see a lot of this start to move towards, the Santa that kids know today here in the Victorian era, but it goes through, sort of a different process. And then we see Coca-Cola create the Santa that we have today. So literally that was a way to sell soft drinks, at the time, that were, not quite the soft drink we know it today. But, at that time, it was this large, jovial sort of man, and, and the white beard and the smile. But before that, it seemed a little more sinister and a little bit more, scary. I mean, St. Nicholas wasn't meant to be terrifying because he was the patron saint for children. So he was he was sort of the Christian accompaniment to Krampus, right? So, you had this Krampus creature coming, and then you would have St. Nicholas come forward, and he would reward the children, right, for being good, while Krampus would terrify the crap out of
Right.
them. But I read a lot. I was reading a lot of sort of older stories, and I love going back and looking at these older stories. Some that people had written in the 1700s, like in the 1700s, they were doing St. Nicholas and Krampus, and they had Krampus knock, and St. Nicholas would come the next day. But I loved the writings of it and the explanations of the stories then, right? How they remembered them. A few writers had written sort of their memories. I guess they've been transcribed into English, obviously German writers at the time, writing about, their remembrance as a child and Krampus and in the village, and how often what would happen too is they would gather at a location, like a town hall, or for a dinner, and then Krampus would come in the night to this location, because then all the families and the kids and everyone would be in one spot, right? And they didn't have to go door to door.
Now, is that traditional that there would be some sort of a feast, like we know today at Christmas,
It seems
associated
that,
with
yeah,
Krampus?
there was a dinner or a breakfast. And I mean, I think really for the towns, obviously, when they got together in those times, going back to, the medieval period and the sort of the Renaissance period, but even pre that, because we're talking pre-Christianity here, but even with the Christianity coming in, it seems like a lot of people would gather in a location and perhaps have a supper. And then you would have Krampus show up, or it may have been a breakfast as well, where Krampus would come the night before, because they would have a party, and the Krampus would come the night before, and then the next morning with the breakfast, St. Nicholas would come and bring the gifts, right? So I think it just depends on the time period, and obviously the locations as to where you were. This was more common out in the small villages and towns than it would have been in the cities, right? So it's a kind of an interesting story. But I think that, where did our modern day obsession with Krampus? It's kind of funny, because I was looking at that and trying to kind of pinpoint back to a period where, in sort of our modern vernacular, this pops up, and it's really, really recent, like really recent, within the last probably 10 to 12 years, that it's sort of started to show up. And this is, I'm not talking about families who are of German origin, or people from Scandinavia, or anybody else who may already know the stories. This is, let's say, become the, the pop culture version of Krampus, right? This, they're making movies of Krampus. They're doing all these things. This kind of comes at a time in just maybe the last 10 or 12 years. And,
Yeah.
It's just become a real sort of thing. And I mean, they even have now too, they have, I mean, the modern take on it sort of in Austria, Germany, Hungary, I think it's Slovenia and the Czech Republic too. Now it kind of involves drunken men dressing up in the costumes and taking over the streets for, they have Krampus Love, which is like a Krampus run where people get chased through the streets by the devils, right? So, so it's really kind of taken a modern twist into, what's happening now. And it seems like, again, Krampus sort of was suppressed. The Catholic Church kind of literally out and out forbade any kind of raucous celebrations. And sort of in the Second World War, they really didn't like Krampus because he was considered to be a creation of social democrats. Really interesting because oddly enough, I'm filming a show in a couple of weeks on Nazi secret bunkers or Nazi secret bases.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I should have been in Germany at a place called Wewelsburg Castle, which was a very well-known SS. It's known as the Temple of Doom. It was where the SS elite hung out, and they sort of started to propagate all kinds of stories and sort of the origins of German people, and they twisted a lot of the history in that. And I think that's why Krampus at that point became very sort of, no, we don't want to go there, because it had become a part of the whole Nazi Party's idea of getting rid of Christianity and bringing back the old pagan beliefs. Only it wasn't really even the old pagan beliefs; it was their warped, their warped version of it. So, it sort of seemed to get pushed to the sidelines then. But just like I say, in the last few years, people are really looking for ways to sort of celebrate Yuletide, and that's not traditional. Well, not traditional here, right? So you start seeing things like Krampus parties and Krampus showing up on TV shows. And like I say, in New Orleans, they have a Krampus parade. And but it's even in Austria, there's areas now that are kind of being condemned because they're commercializing Krampus a lot. So, they're sort of selling chocolates and knickknacks and kitsch of Krampus. And so, it's sort of, I think, annoying the traditionalists.
Yeah.
In terms of, what's happening with Krampus. But I think it's just a fascinating creature.